Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the updates to the Illinois Model Programs of Study Guides by Education Systems Center. Today is May 21st, 2024. Wanted to kind of encourage all of you as you jump on here on the chat to definitely kind of put your name, your organization, and your contact info so we can get a sense of who's joining us here today. This is who's going to be representing kind of Education System Center. My name is Juan Jose Gonzalez. I'm the Managing Director of Pathways and Operations. I'll let my colleagues Sarah and then Liam introduce themselves as well, who are going to be collaborators for me on today's call.
Thanks so much, Juan Jose. I'm Sarah Clark. I'm the Development and Communications Director here at EdSystems, and it's been so fun to work on these guides over the past now 4 years. Liam?
Hi, everyone. My name is Liam Lawson, and I'm the Pathways Fellow through Education Pioneers, and it's also been really fun supporting on this big project.
Great. And then we'll see, hopefully, if you all can just kind of put your information in your name, your title, and your organization in the chat. We really appreciate that. Some kind of a housekeeping kind of for EdSystems webinars. We strongly encourage folks to submit questions or either as a Q&A or in the chat in real time during the webinar. This is something we have several of us who will be kind of looking at those, answering those questions in real time if possible. And it's really helpful because if you might be thinking of something that was potentially unclear from our end and others might be having the same question. So always just put it in the chat and either we'll address it in real time or if we kind of pitch it towards a later in the webinar, we'll be able to circle back as well. We are going to be recording this webinar here today, and we're going to be sharing the slides out to everyone as well. The draft guides are going to be, today you're going to see kind of draft new guides ready for kind of the draft publication, and they'll be available on our website at edsystemsniu.org. We'll put the link to the new guides and the new page and where you can download and really digest them as well. Our agenda today, we're really going to start off with a little bit of a welcome, which we're going through now. We're going to talk a little bit about the background and structure of the original programs of study, how they were created, what they were trying to accomplish, and also some of the problems that those guys presented itself for those trying to implement pathways. We're going to kind of then reveal a new approach to kind of looking at labor market information and using that to inform the pathway design of our programs of study. And we're going to finalize with kind of like what revisions were made based on this new approach and some next steps for all of you all kind of joining us here today about how you can kind of submit your feedback, critiques, or positivity towards the guides for the next 30 days here as we go open up a public comment period for all of you as well. So our goals for today is to really reflect on the living wage and labor market information and how it interacts with pathway design. This is something that's very crucial to kind of how the programs of study were created. It was kind of our unique flavor at EdSystems, and it's actually gotten us some kind of statewide and national attention. Combined, all of our programs of study are our most visited webpage, or kind of not any individual guide, but all of them combined are our most downloaded and kind of visited resource on our webpage at a state and national level. And our goal for today is to therefore collect feedback that can be embedded into revised guides for broader Illinois and national dissemination and use as a resource. For those of you who may be new to EdSystems, we are Education Systems Center out of Northern Illinois University. Our mission is to shape and strengthen education and workforce systems to advance racial equity and prepare young people for the global economy. Our work has 3 main bucket areas, which is the transition to post-secondary, college and career pathways, design and implementation, and also data impact and leadership. You're working with state longitudinal data systems and kind of data protocols to evaluate our guides and evaluate our work. Our work is statewide here in Illinois. We work a lot with state agencies, statewide organizations, but we also work increasingly in centralized or kind of regional community networks, partnerships between high school districts, community colleges, local workforce boards, or local nonprofit organizations, all working together for better youth education, post-secondary outcomes, and also college and career pathway design. Without further ado, I'll take us a little bit into the background on the model programs of study guides. We're going to be sharing throughout the presentation the link to the slide deck here. That's going to be sent out to all of you, but the link to the slide deck has some hyperlinks embedded within the slide deck that we want to encourage you to access and click on during the presentation or afterwards. So we're going to be sending that kind of link to the slide deck as I'm presenting in real time as well. Okay. For those of you familiar with the guides, I see a lot of you are old pros and old hats at kind of digesting these programs of study, and some of you might be kind of newcomers to the programs of study guides, but the intended audiences of our programs of study were high school faculty working in college and career pathway, community college faculty and administration working with high schools, working with local kind of post-secondary partners or nonprofit partners to create and design pathways, and also for kind of the education for employment system directors in Illinois, which kind of are a pass-through of funds of career and technical education, whether they be at the high school or community college level. The guides were created with the purpose of providing guidance and examples for local kind of school districts, community colleges to design secondary to post-secondary pathways together. It was kind of our attempt at what would it look like to do this cohesively, jointly. It was also, they were also intended to identify priority dual credit courses that could be used for pathway implementation between high school and community college partnerships, and to also define competencies that should be sequenced as a part of the secondary to post-secondary space. For each guide, the guides were kind of commissioned or incentivized in partnership, close collaboration with the Illinois Community College Board. There was heavy involvement by the Illinois State Board of Education, but each guide also had a centralized advisory committee. So each industry sector guide had an advisory committee that consisted of high school faculty or administrators, community college faculty or administrators, oftentimes also a sector organization statewide who was familiar or kind of an employer association focused in that industry sector. And the goal of that advisory committee was to really think about like, okay, what promising credentials, what industry trends are we noticing in this sector that is not captured by publicly available labor market information? What is the future of work in this sector? And they really helped us inform key decision points along the way, right? What should be the pathway map? How should we design and look at a pathway map that starts in secondary, goes through community college and onto kind of other opportunities, either at bachelor's or postgraduate levels as well? The advisory committee really helped us think about what are the key competencies that a high school student should know for each pathway sector, and what strategic early college courses, whether they be dual credit or AP, should be embedded into that kind of industry sector guide to make that one maximize the success of those students in that sector. The original development of the guides started in 2019, and the first 4 guides were published in 2020. Each guide typically involved a 6-month process that kind of started from left to right. Essentially, it started with identifying certain kind of occupations and that were central to an industry sector, that were growing, that were robust. And then kind of from those occupations, we then chose what are the promising credentials or post-secondary programs that would prepare you for those occupations. We've centered our approach around the local community college and what was offered at a typical community college in Illinois. We often took kind of samples of rural and urban community colleges. From there, we then tried to identify some strategic courses that were essential to that industry sector, map a secondary to post-secondary sequence, and define related technical competencies. For today's purposes, the edits to the model programs of study are going to be concentrated in the left 2 most sections of this process. So we're really going to kind of deep dive the changes we're making on the left-hand side because of updated labor market information and industry trends. So let me define kind of some of these sections that were fundamental to the development of our guides. When we first created the guides, we created this definition of something called a high priority occupation for an industry sector. We used Department of Labor data and kind of the MIT's living wage calculator, and we wanted to look at occupations that have positive growth outlook and the potential for living wage salaries for 1 adult, 1 child in Illinois. Then from that, we looked at, okay, a promising credential is any degree, certificate, or industry certification that guarantees you or sets you up for entry into a high priority occupation. We focus on credentials that were available in a typical Illinois community college or related organization. Sometimes there were some occupations that were not living wage or didn't meet some of the criteria of high priority occupations, but those occupations were clear stepping stones to kind of other occupations. So we included those in our analysis as well. A classic example of this would have been something like a certified nursing assistant was in many community colleges a clear requirement for entry into a registered nurse program, for example. When we looked at kind of occupations, I'm giving you an example now from some of our preliminary back of the house analysis in finance and business. What we typically did is we kind of would look at occupations like accountants or financial analysts. We would kind of look at kind of what information was presented for that occupation based on the career one-stop page. And we would just kind of document that information in terms of like, what was the median hourly wage at the time? Does this occupation have the potential for living wage? Is there growth for that occupation over the next 10 years? What is the typical entry level for someone getting started in that occupation? What are the statewide annual job openings and the percentage growth for that occupation? Kind of we put all this information typically in a table, and then we would kind of green dot or kind of flag those occupations like these are definitely kind of meeting a lot of the criteria we care about. These should definitely be kind of included in our guide for as a benchmark high priority occupation. And then there were some occupations that were like yellow or like we were uncertain if we should include. And our advisory committee was really essential to kind of determining which ones should be included in the guide or suppressed and not really relevant to that analysis. And those that were left blank were sometimes occupations that just were withheld from analysis in the guide because they either didn't hit a living wage criteria that we were aiming for, they were too low volume, or they had negative growth over the next 10 years. So then when we kind of had a set of occupations that we really cared about, we then tried to kind of align those occupations, like, okay, which of those occupations are aligned to a community college program that could prepare you for entry into those occupations either immediately or down the road. So we kind of made this crosswalk or cross-reference analysis of in finance and business, for example, we would look at what does a typical community college offer? They offer guided transfer programs, associates of applied sciences with specialties in kind of certain subsections of business. We saw that several community colleges offered programs in accounting or supply chain, and we would look at are they offering certificates, associate degrees, or associate of applied science, and we tried to cross-sort those with some of the occupations that we were looking at based on kind of the labor market analysis done before. Whenever possible, we tried to make sure that we aligned the occupations we cared about and the post-secondary programs with the programs being implemented at the secondary level with high school CTE programs. So we made sure to align with ISB's matrix for high school CTE and funding of those programs and making sure that something could be synergized between both the post-secondary space and the high school space. What this ended up resulting with was a typical guide in this fashion. I'm highlighting the health science guide here because this is the one that was the first one that we designed and implemented. And although it was very strong, some of the changes that we're going to be making to the programs and study guides are exemplified by some of the flaws of the health science guide in 2020. So as you see here, at the bottom right of the guide, you'll see the occupations that were focused for this program of study, the post-secondary programs that we really cared about, and then that read into kind of the left side of the screen, which is what are the secondary and immediately post-secondary courses that folks should be looking at and kind of focusing on for pathway design. In the post-secondary options, we would focus on like in health science, we put like on guided transfer options, lots of nursing programs throughout the state, and then opportunities for other health professions and related occupations. And we would show the transition from kind of a certain sector into a certificate, an AAS, or sometimes into a bachelor's degree program as well. And then this is kind of how we presented the labor market information in what was then a digestible manner. Similarly, with the alignment with the post-secondary programs, what are the typical jobs you can get for each post-secondary program? Kind of a yes-no binary for is that job a living wage or provided a living wage for one adult, one child? And based on MIT's living wage calculator, we presented the numeric value of the kind of the median hourly wage and the annual job openings and percentage growth over Illinois. We also had this column of like, is this occupation or post-secondary program stackable to something else? Some problems with the approach that we heard over the years and kind of working with our kind of secondary districts or community colleges at EdSystems over the years. First and foremost, the use of a living wage benchmark of one adult, one child, meaning a family that is centered around one adult who has one dependent, one child, was a really high living wage benchmark for use and implementation, right? It many times, at that time, it was something like over $30 an hour, and it suppressed a lot of occupations that were in high demand and had high growth, but just were never really reaching the living wage benchmark. An example of this was like medical assistant. A lot of regional employers were communicating to local high school districts and community colleges, we really need medical assistants, but the guys were deprioritizing those roles because of the salary band levels. Moreover, another kind of a concern was many occupations that we would highlight that would hit the living wage benchmarks or growth metrics had low volume in Illinois, meaning they weren't really available to many people, even though they hit these other criteria. An example of this were pediatricians, right? Clearly, pediatricians earn well, and there's some potential growth over the next 10 years, but the number of pediatricians compared to other roles in health science was actually really, really low. So we were kind of skewing what is the right kind of avenue students should be thinking about for health science occupations. Once again, the occupations chart that we would present in each guide had a column that created a binary judgment for a living wage. Is this job living wage, yes or no? But not a lot of students use that criteria in their day-to-day understanding of occupations and career trajectories. And it was unclear what we meant by stackability, right? What occupation is stackable to what? What does that mean? Does this, if something is a certificate and then leads to an associate, is that stackable? If I have an industry credential and that builds towards under industry credential, regardless of community college programs or credentials, is that stackable? So there was something that was a little kind of ambiguous and unaligned to how different sectors or different institutions are using the word stackable. With that, I want to take us to a new approach for kind of approaching occupations and labor market information. So here at EdSystems and talking to some of our initial stakeholders, we really wanted to think about like, okay, when looking at occupations, we want to steer young people towards those occupations that are growing, kind of still have some positive outcomes over the next 8 years, but are of relatively high volume, meaning that there's going to be sufficient annual job openings that many students can access those occupations and see themselves in that career and that occupation over time. So what we did is we looked at the Illinois Department of Employment Security, which publishes employment projections over the next 10 years, and also it publishes some of those projections over a 2-year period, right? They break down this information in many ways. They have statewide projections. For those of you looking to kind of look at this work in your region or your community, they break it down by economic development regions, workforce boards areas, which are sometimes those regions overlap a little better with high school districts and community college boundaries, which are very helpful if you are working in that space. In this particular example, we downloaded the statewide projections and we would analyze them kind of through like a spreadsheet and kind of look at those occupations. What you're seeing here on your screen right now, am I sharing my screen? Oh, here it is. I see it coming up now. What you're seeing now is a chart that I would download from the Illinois Department of Employment Security. In column B here, you'll just see, I know it's really little, I'll try to zoom in a little without kind of messing things up. Okay, hopefully that's working a little better. So what you'll see is kind of the information provided by IDES. They have the name of an occupation kind of benchmarked to federal classifications of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They'll look at kind of the base year number of people working in that occupation in 2020, and then they project out occupations for 2030, how many people they expect to grow or change. They report out kind of percentage changes for those occupations, and they also report out the annual job openings for those occupations as well, whether they be because of new jobs or people moving around to kind of lateral moves among those occupations. This spreadsheet is available for you all to download and look at, but I encourage you to kind of go to the source material at IDES and download something that is more relevant to your region as well. So the new approach is focus on occupations with positive growth and simultaneously high volume in 2030. And then those should be our North Star occupations that we're looking at. We don't want to highlight occupations with low possibility of accessing for young people. Another thing we did, and this was kind of the most important, is we updated the way we looked at our living wage benchmarks because those were kind of potentially too high. And with inflation the last couple of years, there's just the suppression of roles that would be considered, given the increases of cost of living, were too complicated. If you haven't done so before, I highly, highly encourage everyone look at MIT's living wage calculator. This tool is often referenced and cited now by the federal government for what they define as living wage benchmarks. We often here at EdSystems look at kind of the statewide data for what is the living wage in Illinois, and they break it down by different family sizes. You can kind of look at a family that assumes like one adult with no children, with some children or multiple children. Sometimes that gives you a family size of 2 adults with multiple children, or 2 adults, 1 working, 2 adults both working, and it'll give you benchmarks for what the criteria for living wage there. Some things to keep in mind for living wage benchmarks is this is the salary, the median hourly salary that someone would have to earn to hit the living wage if they were just living and covering all their expenses. This doesn't factor in like them contributing to savings or retirement. It's just the ability to cover all your living expenses. So even that is kind of not common to how, so those of us who are kind of working full time think of ourselves as contributing to savings or contributing to retirement. The living wage is even a lower benchmark of just, you're not even saving towards buying a house. You're just covering your rent or your funding costs. So in the previous approach, we really benchmarked all our guides to this notion of the median wage necessary to hit the threshold of 1 adult with 1 dependent, i.e. 1 child. In 2019, that amount was $26.27 an hour. And even that was too high a benchmark for many of the occupations we were looking at. And we tried to lessen it to 75% of that amount to $22.33. Instead of kind of unfortunately, the living wage now for 1 adult, 1 child is now $39.63 an hour since 2019. That's just the cost of living has radically changed, as many of you know and are experiencing as well. So instead of having just that one single benchmark for a living wage criteria, we're going to create a spectrum of benchmarks, right? And kind of think about how does an occupation align with a spectrum of benchmarks or different family sizes. So at our high end, if you can if an occupation hits the benchmark of 1 adult, 1 child, that's a really high potential for living wage. But we also kind of imagine that some young people might live by themselves or kind of be able to sustain themselves. So we really created this intermediate benchmark of 1 young person being able to sustain themselves, which is about $22 to $23 an hour. And anything in between, so anything in between the 1 adult or 1 adult, 1 child was going to be a medium potential for living wage. And anything lower than that was just going to be considered low potential for living wage. The reasoning here is we don't want to unnecessarily suppress any occupations that should be included in our analysis because they might be stepping stones or integral to the sector, right? We want to show those occupations with high volume, and we don't want to just suppress occupations that are entry-level or starter-level occupations. For those of you kind of looking at this, kind of when thinking about where can we access Illinois wage data for occupations, once again, IDES does this really, really well. They provide kind of median wage information for all the occupations listed as kind of the employment projections. You can download those occupations as an Excel file or kind of look at it as a PDF for all the occupations listed, but they also provide occupation benchmarks for regional parts of the state. So by metropolitan statistical area, by economic development region, or local workforce area, once again, that align closely to what you might be looking at in a local community college, high school, or nonprofit region. We went ahead and downloaded that data and kind of started digesting and looking at it, right? What we would look at is, what we would look at typically is, okay, looking at a certain kind of role, what is the median wage for that role at an hourly level? And kind of thinking about, does that salary of that role hit our multiple benchmarks of living wage, one adult, one child, living wage for one adult by themselves, and is it above either of those roles? Does it have a medium living wage potential, and what have you, right? So we're going to kind of explain that a little bit in subsequent slides. So what we started doing in our kind of occupations chart is we would show once again the occupations we cared about. And then we, instead of kind of giving a binary for this occupation is living wage, yes or no, we would kind of label occupations. This occupation has a high living wage potential, a medium living wage potential, or a low living wage potential. Low was only reserved for those occupations that were under the living wage of one adult kind of being able to sustain themselves. But we kept a lot of the other information in the guides, which is what is the median hourly wage, what is the percentage growth of that occupation, and what is the annual job openings of that occupation statewide. We did change the information we presented in our kind of labor market information as well. Instead of kind of providing this column called stackability, what we found is that many students sometimes need to understand, what does it take for me to get started in this role? And that should dictate what is the level of post-secondary attainment that I should be striving for. So we provided an information about the typical education requirements that someone would need to get started in that role. Sometimes that was a bachelor's degree, sometimes it was an associate's degree, sometimes it was just simply as some college, right? Like a semester's worth of college, a certificate, and we would kind of label that information in this chart. So occupations are now shown as being on a living wage scale, and the notion of stackability was replaced with, what does it take for you to get started in this occupation in terms of level of education needed? We applied this methodology to 8 of our 10 published guides. So we applied this methodology to 8 guides in arts and communications, architecture, construction and energy, AF&R, agriculture, food and natural resources, education, finance and business, health sciences, information technology, and also manufacturing and engineering. So we now have newly designed guides incorporating this new approach, and we're asking you all now as kind of stakeholders implementing these pathways on the ground to really give us your feedback as we launch kind of the design. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to my colleague Sarah to talk about how the look and feel of these guides are next.
Yeah, thanks so much, Juan. So here's a look across 3 pages of what a typical pathway map is going to look like when you download one of these guides. And once you get to that download, you'll notice that the table of contents has hyperlinks, and you're able to jump directly to this guide, which is located at the very end of each. This map is located at the very end of each one of the guides. So hopefully that makes it easier for you. Once these are finalized and made public, we'll be sure that the map is also available as a separate download. But you'll notice a few updates to the graphic design of the guides. Next slide, please, Juan. Since the release of the first 10 guides, we, the EdSystems team, have worked with several different Illinois regions to provide some targeted technical assistance in designing pathways. Most of those projects culminated with the creation of a designed map, much of like what's in our guides. And these were, just like in the guides, they were intended to be used by administrators, by faculty, by staff. They're not designed to be student and family-facing versions. However, I started to get a lot of feedback on how the existing design, the graphic design, made it a little difficult to understand very clearly what courses were required and which ones were optional. Especially if you look at a subject matter row, such as for focus courses or a math row, it became confusing for folks to know, like, well, is everything listed in there required, or am I supposed to choose one of these? How does this actually work? So when given the opportunity to update the guides, I wanted to build on the great work of Juan Jose and consider how we can make the graphic design a little clearer to understand. So this new design that you're seeing now is trying to clarify by grouping choices within their own separate spaces or bubbles. So you can see there an orientation, there's just one bubble in the career-focused courses, that computer applications for business, that is the recommended course. And then when you look at that skill development column, you start to see there's 3 different bubbles. That first one tells you to choose one, right? So it becomes very clear what those options are. And it might be that the school district is choosing which course out of those they're going to implement, or maybe they have a breadth of courses available to students and the students will know which ones to choose. They're also color coded in this map because we've got multiple pathways. You can see the networking is the darkest color, right? We've got computer information systems. So trying to provide a quick clue to both faculty, administrators, staff of how these courses fit within the multiple pathways within IT. Fun fact, I also got to share the designs with our own high school intern to get her feedback. How was she able to read this? And the before and after was more effective for her. So I hope it's true for everyone else, but appreciate the feedback. You can go ahead for it, Juan. Another big change that we made is we previously constricted our pathway maps to fit on an 11 by 17 page. This was when we were still very much thinking in a print world, and with the pandemic and a lot of virtual learning, we've all learned to just do more things digitally. So the feedback I started receiving from our regional partners is that they weren't printing it out, and that having it constricted to that size made it hard for them to read on the screen. They wanted it more accessible. They wanted the font sizes larger. They wanted it based on an 8.5 by 11 page, which was easier for them to print if they actually chose to. And most importantly, they didn't want us constricting the content that we were sharing. They wanted to see all of the post-secondary program options. They wanted to see all of the occupations. And so expanding just how much square inches these pathway maps are taking in the design helped us do that. Of course, the recommendation is that you take these pathway maps and customize them for your school district and your community college partnerships locally, that you are creating regional versions of this, and that you're considering what a student and family facing version of the map should look like. It's probably going to be more refined than this, but here you can see the color continues to match what those different IT pathways look like in the post-secondary opportunity space. And then on that last slide, we have the occupations. You can go forward one. Yeah, which one already shared that color coding also stays. And one new thing is we're adding those hyperlinks to the different career one-stop pages. So as you're building your own regional versions of these maps, you're able to get to that information more quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so next steps and kind of the opportunity for feedback from all of you all. What we are going to be doing is we're going to be launching a public comment period. So we would love for the next 30 days for all of you to take your time and really engage and digest the guides in a slow and deliberate manner. We're not just going to ask you to comment right now, but we really would love for you all to download the draft guides. They're kind of available on our webpage. All 8 guides are available in this kind of our EdSystems webpage. It's hyperlinked in the deck, and I think my colleague Liam is putting them into the chat box as well. You can download each guide by clicking on the image and also the name of the guide as well. We have some background on the guides and some information there. We also would love for you all to then submit public comment on each guide or on the new approach by June 21st. The webpage that we hyperlinked has the opportunity for you to kind of access the public comment survey. And we did this in our first publication of these guides. We used a public comment period and survey to get people's feedback, and it was very robust and very helpful. We were able to sometimes kind of look at what feedback that was coming in, go back to our advisory committee to kind of summarize and synthesize that feedback, and then make decisions about like what we wanted to keep or what we felt was not ready to fully be incorporated into the guide. So it was a very robust and pretty successful process. You'll see you'll kind of get you'll be able to go to like a Qualtrics survey where you put your name, your organization, your title. The reason why we ask for your information is sometimes some of your feedback is very robust, and we just want to kind of further clarify and get details about what you mean to make sure we fully understand it and kind of synthesize that with some of the other feedback we're getting in real time. One thing that we want to encourage here is there's 8 guides. We don't want you to provide, if you want to provide feedback in all 8 guides, you are welcome to do so. but doing that in one sitting might be really difficult, right? So what we want to just encourage you is if you tackle one guide and one set of resources and want to provide your feedback there, submit. But if you want to come back a week later and submit kind of feedback for some other guides, go ahead and do that, right? You can submit feedback multiple times based on kind of what guide you're looking at that time. Don't feel like you have to just submit it all at one sitting. You can kind of come back and submit over time as well. And the survey allows for that possibility. So definitely download the guides, print them out. They're kind of printable in an 8.5 by 11 page. Submit your kind of public comment 1 month from now. We want to hear about the strengths, kind of changes to some of the new approach and feedback. And we want to incorporate kind of how you would use the guides or have been using the guides and making sure we're addressing those issues. On the EdSystems side, our next steps is to kind of incorporate, after the public comment period ends, is to incorporate your feedback and republish the resource with kind of the fully finalized feedback and kind of adjustments. And we're going to be sharing these guides throughout Illinois through our websites, EdSystems Communications. We often present on these guides at conferences, and we offer technical assistance to communities who want to engage in the design of college and career pathways as well. And we always kind of use these guides as a benchmark for the starting of those conversations. With that, we are kind of ending our kind of webinar content. Obviously, we know that just hearing and listening to someone is a little tiresome. So we just want to give everyone an opportunity to digest the guides and tackle the work. I'm going to pivot to kind of see what's happening in the chat. But if folks wanted to kind of type in or share kind of some closing reflections from themselves, what we always do at EdSystems is kind of thinking about like, is there something that's still circling in your head upon hearing about our new approach? Is there anything that was mentioned today that squares with your thinking about how we should be thinking about college and career pathways? Or one important point from today that was mentioned that you want to emphasize for yourself or for others? We kind of welcome you sharing that all in the chat. And with that, I really appreciate your help and kind of will be responding for folks here as well. Thank you.